And this is where we left off. And I don't mean to slight how much time I'm spending on each of those. I think those of you who are having trouble getting the information, I think these are very good visually, and particularly if you put those together with the outlines. So make sure you're utilizing the outlines, because I've heard from other students that they're very, very useful. And then here I think is the last one. Oh, actually, this is just the other half of the other one. Sorry, I didn't realize I had so many of these on. But this is an increase in blood pressure. It is slightly different. So increase in blood pressure, the peptides are released by the heart. That causes a vast change, increase in sodium loss. Remember, water follows sodium. Reduced thirst, blockage of the aldosterone, antidiuretic hormone, aldosterone, epinephrine, norepinephrine, epinephrine and norepinephrine release. This is blockage of this, and then peripheral vasodilation. All of this is going to reduce blood pressure, and then also reduce blood volume. Exercise in the cardiovascular system, just a little bit of a shout out to it because we get so much information about how good it is for us. And what light exercise does is results in vasodilation. Vasodilation means more oxygen is getting to the tissues. Increases venous return, and that's Frank Starling's law. The more coming in, the more going out. And so basically by increasing venous return, you increase cardiac output. And heavy exercise, sometimes you can have too much. For example, if you're putting heavy and intense in the same category, you have blood flow to skeletal organs. You have restricted blood flow to organs that are non-essential to exercise anyway, like your digestive organs, and sometimes can cause very intense exercise can cause severe physical stress. Just an FYI, particularly if you have intense exercise with water loss, you can have an incredible stress to the kidney, particularly. In terms of circulatory patterns, and again, in this particular teaching time, it's not my intention to go through every blood vessel, but the blood vessels will show up on your test, but just generally talk about the circulatory patterns and certain vessels. 4 main arteries to the brain, and the thing I wanted to include here is this concept of anastomosis, or that 4 arteries anastomose, do the activity of anastomosis. And what that does for you is allow constant blood flow to the brain. Of all the blood that's flowing through your body, about 20% goes up to the brain. The brain has high oxygen demand, and not only high oxygen demand, but constant high oxygen demand. So if you have any of those 4 that are feeding up to the brain might be occluded, you have another one to take up the slack. That's what the anastomose means. You have at least 2 blood sources to a specific spot in the brain. You have that throughout the brain, in the design, throughout the brain all over. In terms of the heart, coronary arteries arise from the ascending aorta, so the heart gets fed first. That as soon as the blood comes out of the aorta, as that arch ascends, those where the coronary arteries come off. Coronary arteries feed the entire heart muscle. The lungs, the pulmonary circuit is regulated by local, so the alveolar responses to O2. This is opposite of other tissues. So the other tissues, decline in O2 causes vasodilation. So it's those alveoli that are sensitive to the oxygen levels. And then a little bit about blood flow to the brain in terms of vessels. what you're looking at are the common carotids and then the vertebral. What you want to do, you have some nice concept maps in your chapters, but you have these common carotid arteries coming right off the aortic arch, going up to the brain. That's how important it is with regard to the blood flow to the brain. And then this idea of the multiple arteries feeding one area, that anastomosis concept, you have that going on in the brain. And then draining the brain, you have the jugular, the internal external jugular vein, the main vein that's draining the arteries, and then the venous flow with regard to the brain. You actually have this not so much pooling, but you have sinuses that the blood is because I don't like the word pooling. When you think of pooling, you think of blood that could actually clot, that is collecting and then draining into the jugular. In terms of the pulmonary circuit, one of the big things that I will say over and over again, arteries is blood going away from the heart. We don't necessarily put that oxygenated and deoxygenated. So you have the pulmonary arteries going away from the heart via the right ventricle to the lungs. They have the pulmonary veins bringing that oxygenated blood. It happens to be oxygenated, but it's coming back to the heart. Pulmonary veins to that left atria, and they are veins coming back from the lungs. The systemic circulation is defined as blood from the heart to all parts of the body and then back to the heart. We tend to sometimes exclude the pulmonary circulation, so blood from the ascending aorta to the right and left coronary arteries. Again, that they originate from the base of that aortic sinus. Definitely have in your head the branches off the aortic, the brachiocephalic, the left common carotid. That's the one that's going right up to the brain, the left subclavian. And then the descending aorta and its branches, superior inferior vena cava, and the branches that basically feed into the superior inferior vena cava. This portal system, and what a portal system is defined as, I think we've had a little bit of that in the past, is a area where more than one capillary bed feeds into. This is what a portal system is. And one of the reasons why it's important with regard to the hepatic portal system is because you have capillaries from the digestive organs. So this hepatic portal system delivers the nutrients that have just been digested from the digestive system and deliver it to the liver for processing. The liver does so many different things, the things that are processed. Certainly the need to make for proteins to make antibodies, and also for any kind of problems, toxic problems or waste products. The liver can monitor blood glucose levels. We can just leave it at that. It's something that we definitely are familiar with. For taking glucose out and creating the Ford storm of glucose. That blood is then shunted to the liver and then right on to the inferior vena cava. The last thing we need to talk about on this one is fetal circulation, and I think the most probably the most confusing thing is that fetal circulation is always talked about in terms of arteries or veins from the mom, because the mom is making this blood. So the blood comes to the placenta, and we pick this up again when we talk about the reproductive system. But blood comes to the placenta. That's the oxygenated blood. It's made its way all the way through the mom's body into the placenta, and it's making its way to the child So with regard to fetal circulation, blood flows to the placenta through a pair of umbilical arteries. And they arise from the internal iliac arteries and enter the umbilical cord. So that's to the placenta. Blood returns from the placenta via a single umbilical vein, which drains in the ductus venosus. So returns from the placenta to the baby, I guess you might say, via a single umbilical vein. That single umbilical vein then is going to drain into the ductus venosus. That ductus venosus, you can see it's pointing to the liver area. That then dumps that blood into the inferior vena cava. Now there's already blood that's coming up from the lower part of the body that's dumping in there too, which is why you have this blue blood coming from the lower part of the baby's body and the reddish blood coming out of the liver, and that both is mixing. So then what you get is more of this purple color, and that's entering into the right atria. There's an opening between the right atria and the left atria, and so blood passes through. There's a little bit of blood that goes out to the lungs, but the lungs aren't functioning at this time. It will pass through into the left atria. The blood will drop down into the two ventricles. A little bit will be pumped out into the lungs, but not much. Most of it is going to be pumped out the left ventricle of the baby's heart to all parts of the body, up to the brain, and then down into the legs. And what you're looking at now is the more purpley type vessel. So you have a blue vessel, you have a red vessel, you have a blue vessel, and a purple vessel. The red and blue vessel, the arrows are all going from the placenta up to the heart to circulate, and the purple one is going from the heart down to the body. But what you have then is that purple one, you have a little turn, that's where the two umbilical arteries are. They're draining the blood that's already circulated and going back to the placenta. So you have two shunts. You have two bypass shunts. You bypass the pulmonary circuit via the foraminal valve and the ductus arteriosus. Ductus arteriosus is between the right and left arteries, and then you also have that ductus venosus, which shunts the blood from the liver to the inferior vena cava. The foraminal valve, I think I missaid that, is the opening between the left and right atrium, is the foraminal valve. And that's covered by a flap, particularly after birth. And the ductus arteriosus, that connects the pulmonary and the aortic trunks. So I don't know if I see that. I see the ovale arterios. It's you see it pointing to an area that looks kind of like no man's. We actually now we have kind of a bigger one. Oh, there it is. You can see it at the top right where it says left atrium, just above that ductus arteriosus closed, where you have a shunt between pulmonary and aortic trunks. We are done with this, and we will see you in the next chapter.